The chandelier glowed like a constellation trapped in amber, casting soft gold across the restored barn in rural Virginia. The air smelled of roses and expensive wine, and a jazz quartet hummed in the corner, their notes weaving through laughter and clinking glasses. Susan adjusted the strap of her mauve chiffon dress, hand-stitched, chosen after weeks of deliberation. Her graying hair, swept into an elegant updo, caught the light as she stepped through the arched doors of the venue. This was Ethan's wedding day, her son, her world. She'd paid for every detail. The floral arches, the gold-rimmed plates, the custom neon sign that read "The future is forever" in loopy cursive. She expected a seat at the head table, a nod in the program, a moment to shine as the mother who'd made it all possible. But the first sting came before the ceremony even began. "Susan, could you step to the side for this one?" Ava's voice was syrupy, her smile tight as she waved a manicured hand. The photographer was arranging the family portraits under a willow tree outside the barn, the late afternoon sun painting everyone in warm hues. Susan blinked, her beige leather handbag, Ethan's Mother's Day gift from years ago, clutched against her chest. "It's just for the immediate family shots," Ava added, her eyes flicking to her own mother, Linda, who was fussing over Ethan's tie like she'd raised him. Susan nodded, stepping back, her heels sinking into the grass. She told herself it was fine, just a photo. But then Ava called for another shot, and another, each one excluding Susan. Linda's pearls gleamed as she posed beside Ethan, her laughter loud and performative. Ethan didn't look Susan's way, too busy grinning for the camera, his cufflinks glinting. Susan's throat tightened, but she swallowed it down. She'd worked double shifts for those cufflinks, just like she had for his braces, his college applications, his everything. Inside, the reception hall buzzed with guests in tailored suits and flowing dresses. Susan scanned the seating chart near the entrance, her heart lifting at the thought of her place near Ethan. But a young staff member, barely out of his teens, approached, his face flushed. "Ma'am, there's been a last-minute change," he stammered, avoiding her eyes. Ms. Ava said, "Well, she wanted to keep the aesthetic consistent for the photos." Susan's fingers tightened around her handbag, the leather creaking. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice low. The boy winced. "Your seat's been moved to the back, near the kitchen." Susan stared, her pulse thudding in her ears. "Moved by Ava. At the wedding she'd funded with every cent of her savings." She followed him through the crowd, past tables draped in ivory linen, past the floral centerpiece she'd spent $3,000 on. The kitchen door loomed ahead, its silver edge dented from years of use. As she passed a group of bridesmaids, she caught Ava's voice, low and smug, speaking to one of them. "She just needed to pay for it, not be in it. You know how it is." The words hit Susan like a slap, sharp and cold. She froze, her breath catching, but Ava didn't notice her, already turning away with a toss of her blonde curls. Susan's hands trembled, the old wedding ring on her right hand, kept as a reminder of her late husband's promises, feeling suddenly heavy. She wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but the staff member was still waiting, gesturing toward the door. She followed, her mauve dress brushing the floor, every step heavier than the last. The kitchen was a chaos of clanging trays and shouted orders, the air thick with the sour tang of marinara and grease. A folding chair sat in the corner, a paper napkin tossed carelessly over its stained seat. That was her place, beside a cart with a squeaking wheel and a stack of used trays. Susan stood there, blinking hard, the heat from the ovens pressing against her back. Her dress, her 3 hours at the salon, her hopes for this day, they all felt like a cruel joke. She glanced at the chipped white plate someone had set before her, a cold chicken breast abandoned on it. Her nails, freshly painted soft pink, dug into her palms. She thought of Ethan at 5, his tiny hand in hers as she sewed his school uniform late into the night, her fingers bleeding from the needle. She thought of his 10th birthday, when she'd worked overtime to buy a chocolate cake with sprinkles, his eyes lighting up as he hugged her. "Mama," he'd called her then. Now he hadn't even looked at her when she arrived. The door swung open, spilling laughter and music from the reception hall. Susan caught a glimpse of Ethan twirling Ava under the chandelier, his smile wide, oblivious. Linda was at the head table, draped in navy chiffon, raising a glass like she'd orchestrated the entire day. Susan pressed the napkin to her mouth, pretending to dab a non-existent stain, but her eyes burned. Not from the onions in the kitchen, not from the steam. From betrayal. From being erased. She'd paid for the shrimp cocktail, the band, the roses, every detail of their fairy tale, and they'd relegated her to this. A ghost in the kitchen. Purse string. Problem solved by a folding chair. She sat, the chair creaking under her. The floor was sticky, a dark stain, gravy, maybe, beneath her shoes. She stared at the peeling paint behind a fire extinguisher. Her anchor. The only thing keeping her from shattering in front of a waiter carrying crab puffs. Her heart pounded, a subtle vibration like electricity trapped in her chest. She thought of confronting Ethan, of storming into the hall and demanding her place. But it was his day. She'd promised herself she wouldn't ruin it. She'd swallowed her pride for him so many times. Why should today be different? But then the door swung again, and she locked eyes with Ava. Ava saw her, knew where she was, knew what she'd done, and she smiled. Not nervously, not apologetically, but calmly, confidently, like Susan belonged here, hidden away. Ava turned back to her bridesmaids, laughing, and something inside Susan cracked. Not loudly, but quietly, like a hairline fracture in glass, invisible until the whole pane shatters. She stood, her hands no longer shaking. The rage wasn't loud. It was precise, controlled, a blade sharpening in her mind. She pulled out her phone, her fingers steady as she scrolled to the florist's number. The call was short, direct. Cancel tomorrow's brunch arrangements. No refunds needed. Then the band. The second payment is off. Don't show tonight. Finally, the bar manager. Close the open bar at 10. No extensions. Her voice was calm, each word a deliberate cut. When she hung up, the kitchen noise faded, replaced by a quiet hum in her chest, like an engine roaring back to life. She'd been their wallet, their backdrop, their silence. No more. Let them toast without her. Let them feel the absence. She slipped out the side door, the cool Virginia night wrapping around her like a promise. The stars above the barn were sharp, unyielding. Her phone buzzed. Missed calls from Ethan. A text from Ava. What's going on? Susan didn't answer. She'd given them enough. If this moment hit you, subscribe and tell us, where are you watching from? Let's share the stories of those who dared to take back their power. Susan walked to her car, her mauve dress catching the moonlight, and for the first time in years, she felt the weight of her own strength. They thought she was invisible. They had no idea what she could unravel. The night air in Richmond was heavy with the scent of honeysuckle, but inside Susan's modest two-story home, the silence was heavier still. She stood in her living room, still in her mauve chiffon dress, the fabric now wrinkled and carrying the faint sourness of kitchen grease from the wedding. The house felt like a museum of her sacrifices. Framed photos of Ethan's high school graduation on the mantel, a dent in the doorframe from when he'd crashed his bike indoors, the faded armchair where she'd rocked him to sleep as a toddler. Susan's fingers grazed the old wedding ring on her right hand, its gold dulled by years of wear. She hadn't taken it off since Michael's death, a reminder of promises broken and burdens carried alone. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, a cascade of missed calls and texts lighting up the screen. Ethan, Ava, Linda. She ignored them all, her eyes fixed on the roses blooming wildly outside her window, their thorns sharp in the moonlight. The first voicemail played as she poured herself a glass of water, her hands steady but her heart unsteady. Ethan's voice, usually so confident, cracked with confusion. Mom, what's going on? The bar shut down early, the band just left, and Ava's freaking out. Call me back, please. Susan set the glass down, the clink against the counter louder than it should have been. She pictured the scene back at the barn. Ava's perfect curls falling out of place, her navy chiffon gown crumpling as she barked at the staff, blaming them for the chaos. Ethan, caught in the middle, his tailored suit no longer a shield. The brunch flowers wouldn't arrive tomorrow. The band wouldn't play their final set. The open bar, Ava's pride and joy, had run dry. Susan had pulled the strings, and now they were unraveling. A flicker of satisfaction sparked in her chest, but it was chased by a deeper ache. She'd built Ethan's world, and he'd let her be erased from it. She sank into the armchair, the fabric worn soft by years of use. Her mind drifted to a winter night when Ethan was 12, his face flushed with excitement as she drove through a snowstorm to get him to a chess tournament in Charlottesville. She'd gripped the wheel, her knuckles white, praying the old sedan wouldn't skid. Ethan had won a trophy that day, a small plastic thing he'd clutched like gold, hugging her so tight she could still feel his warmth. "You're the best, Mom," he'd said. Now, he hadn't even glanced at her in the barn, too busy basking in Linda's praise, letting Ava push her into the kitchen. The memory twisted like a knife, and Susan's breath caught. She wasn't just angry. She was hollow, as if the love she'd poured into Ethan had been siphoned out, leaving only echoes. The phone buzzed again. A text from Ava this time, sharp and accusing. "Margaret, this is unacceptable. Fix it." Susan's lips twitched, a bitter smile forming. Margaret. Ava couldn't even get her name right. She imagined Ava's face, that smug confidence cracking as guests whispered, as her carefully curated fairy tale collapsed. Susan had been their bank, their silence, their invisible scaffold. No more. She stood, her bare feet cold against the hardwood floor, and walked to the guest room. The drawer in the old dresser was half stuck, as always, requiring a hip bump to open. She wasn't looking for anything specific, just something to anchor her, to make sense of the fracture inside her. But there, beneath yellowing tax returns and expired coupons, was a red folder, its edges frayed. She pulled it out, her pulse quickening for reasons she couldn't name. Inside was a single letter, no envelope, just folded once. Then again. The handwriting was unmistakable. Michael's, slanted and hurried, dated 3 days before his death. Susan's knees weakened, and she sat on the edge of the guest bed, the springs creaking. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper, the ring on her right hand catching the dim light. "Susan, if you're reading this, I guess you found the first letter. I don't know if you opened it. I hope you did. I won't waste time apologizing again. I need to tell you something more." Her breath hitched, the words blurring for a moment. "Ethan isn't biologically yours. I found out years ago. Ava knew, too. She's known since before the engagement. She used it, Susan. Used you. To cover her own mess." Susan's heart stopped, then pounded, a drumbeat in her chest. Ava knew. Ava had known Ethan wasn't hers and still let Susan pour everything. Her savings, her love, her life, into their wedding. The letter went on. Michael's words a confession of cowardice. She had debts, gambling debts. She needed your money to bury them. I should have told you.
I'm sorry.
Susan set the letter down, her hands no longer trembling but cold, as if the blood had drained from them. She saw it all now. Ava's tight smiles, her insistence on elevated details, the unauthorized charges on Susan's card for pre-wedding bar crawls and spa days. Ava hadn't just erased her from the wedding. She'd weaponized Susan's love for Ethan to dig herself out of a hole. The kitchen chair, the napkin, the chipped plate, it wasn't just humiliation. It was a transaction. Susan's vision narrowed, the room fading to a single point of clarity. She wasn't just a mother scorned. She was a woman betrayed, and the betrayal was a map, leading her to a new kind of power. She moved to her laptop, the screen casting a pale glow across her face. Her fingers hovered over the keys, steady now, purposeful. She opened her email, selected an anonymous account she'd set up years ago for a forgotten reason. The subject line was simple: the truth about Ava. The body was short, precise. A blade slipped between ribs. Ava's gambling debts were paid by Susan's savings. She knew Ethan wasn't Susan's son and used it to manipulate her. Check her accounts. She attached a scanned copy of Michael's letter, blurred just enough to protect herself, clear enough to damn Ava. Her cursor lingered over the send button, her heart racing, not with fear but with the thrill of crossing a line. She pictured Ava's family. Linda with her pearls, her father with his booming laugh. Opening the email, their faces falling as the truth sank in. Susan clicked send, the soft chime of the email echoing like a gunshot in the quiet house. She leaned back, her breath slow, deliberate. The roses outside her window seemed sharper now, their thorns glinting. Her phone buzzed again, but she didn't check it. Let them scramble. Let Ava's lies unravel. Susan stood, walked to the mirror above the dresser. Her reflection startled her. Mascara smudged, gray hair loose, but her eyes were alive, burning with something new. Not grief, not heartbreak, power. If this truth shook you, subscribe and share. When did you face a hidden lie? Susan turned away from the mirror, the letter still open on the bed, a testament to her choice. She wasn't done. Not yet. The game had just begun, and she was no longer playing by their rules. The morning after the email, Susan woke to a world that felt sharper, as if the edges of reality had been honed overnight. Her Richmond home was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums with possibility, but her phone was a battlefield. 27 missed calls, a dozen texts, 3 voicemails. Ethan's name flashed most, followed by Ava's, then Linda's. Susan didn't listen to them. She didn't need to. She could imagine the chaos at the barn. Linda's pearls clattering as she demanded answers, her husband's booming laugh silenced by the email's cold truth. Ava's gambling debts, her manipulation, her knowledge of Ethan's origins, all laid bare in a few typed lines. Susan sipped her coffee, black and strong, by the kitchen window. The roses outside were in full bloom, their petals vivid against the thorns. She felt like those roses now, beautiful but armed. Her phone buzzed again, a voicemail from Ethan. His voice trembled, not with the confidence of the groom but with something raw, fractured. "Mom, I don't know what's happening. Ava's saying it's a misunderstanding, but everyone's talking about you, about her debts. Did you do this? Please, call me." Susan set the phone down, her fingers grazing the old wedding ring on her right hand. The gold was scratched, a relic of Michael's broken vows. She thought of Ethan at 4, waking from a nightmare, his small body trembling as he climbed into her lap. "Mommy," he'd whispered, the first time he'd called her that, his voice a lifeline in the dark. She'd held him until dawn, promising she'd always be there. Now he was begging for answers, but he hadn't asked how she felt. He hadn't said, "I'm sorry for letting them push you away." Susan's chest ached, but the ache was no longer soft. It was hard, unyielding like stone. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. Susan froze, her coffee mug halfway to her lips. Through the frosted glass of the front door, she saw Ava's silhouette, tall, rigid, her blonde curls loose and wild. Susan's pulse quickened, not with fear but with anticipation. She set the mug down and opened the door, her face a mask of calm. Ava stood there, her navy dress wrinkled, mascara smudged, but her eyes burned with defiance. "How dare you?" she hissed, stepping inside without invitation. "You sent that email, didn't you? You're trying to ruin me." Susan closed the door, her movements deliberate. "Ruin you?" she said, her voice low, a blade wrapped in silk. "You did that yourself, Ava. When you used me. When you lied." Ava's lips curled, a sneer barely masking her panic. "You're pathetic, Susan. Throwing a tantrum because you didn't get a seat at the table? This was my day, not yours." She paced the living room, her heels clicking against the hardwood. "I'm sorry you felt left out, okay? But this is sabotage. You're embarrassing Ethan, your own son." Susan's laugh was cold, sharp, cutting through Ava's words like glass. "My son," she said, stepping closer, her eyes locked on Ava's. "You knew he wasn't mine, didn't you? You knew and you let me pay for your lies, your debts, your fairy tale." Ava's face paled, but she recovered quickly, her voice dropping to a plead. "Susan, please, we can fix this. For Ethan's sake." Susan pulled the red folder from the coffee table, where Michael's letter lay open, its slanted handwriting a silent witness. She held it up, her hand steady. This says you knew, Ava. You knew Ethan wasn't mine, and you used it to bleed me dry. $3,000 for flowers. $5,000 for your dress. Thousands more for your gambling debts, buried in my card statements. Ava's eyes widened, her breath hitching, but Susan didn't stop. I built your world, Ava. Now watch it burn. Ava lunged forward, her voice cracking. You can't do this. You'll destroy Ethan too. Susan didn't flinch. He let you push me into the kitchen, she said, her words a quiet thunder. He made his choice. Ava's defiance crumbled, her shoulders sagging as she backed toward the door, tears streaking her face. You're a monster, she whispered. Susan opened the door, her gaze unyielding.
No, Ava. I'm awake.
Ava fled, her sobs echoing down the driveway, and Susan closed the door, the click final, like a lock snapping shut. She returned to the guest room, the air heavy with the scent of old paper and lavender. The red folder was still on the bed, but something compelled her to check the drawer again. Her fingers brushed a second letter, thinner, tucked into the sleeve of the folder. Michael's handwriting again, dated 3 days before his death. Susan, if you're reading this, you know Ethan isn't yours. But there's more. He was never meant to be yours. His mother, Emily, left him at my door, 18 and scared. She wanted him gone, adoption, anything. I couldn't do it. I lied to you, told you he was ours. You loved him anyway. You were the only one strong enough. Susan's knees buckled, and she sank onto the bed, the letter trembling in her hands. Ethan, her Ethan, was a stranger's child, abandoned and handed to her like a test. And she'd passed. Every fever, every bedtime story, every double shift to buy him sneakers. She'd passed with colors so bright they'd blinded her to her own worth. The pain was a wave crashing over her, but it didn't drown her. It sharpened her, like a blade mended in fire. Her phone buzzed again, another voicemail from Ethan. Mom, I heard about the email. Ava's a mess, and I don't know what to believe. I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean for you to feel like that. His voice broke, and Susan closed her eyes, seeing him at 4, his tiny hand clutching hers. But the Ethan who stood by while Ava banished her to the kitchen wasn't that boy. He was a man who'd chosen silence over loyalty. She didn't call back. An hour later, she glanced out the window and saw him, Ethan, standing by her mailbox, his shoulders hunched, his hand raised as if to knock but frozen. His face was a map of conflict, guilt warring with confusion. He turned away, climbing into his car, and Susan let him go. Some bridges burned quietly. She drove to a law office in downtown Richmond that afternoon, the city's brick buildings glowing in the autumn light. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Karen, listened as Susan laid out the evidence. Michael's letters, the unauthorized charges, Ava's debts. You've got a strong case for fraud, Karen said, her pen tapping the desk. We can demand full restitution for the wedding costs, maybe more. Susan nodded, her jaw tight. Do it, she said. I want her to feel every cent. Karen's eyes flickered with respect. This could get ugly, she warned. Susan's smile was thin, unyielding. Good. The plan took shape over the next 2 days. Linda was hosting a family gathering at her sprawling colonial home, a post-wedding brunch to salvage Ava's reputation. Susan knew it was the perfect stage. She spent hours preparing, not with nerves but with precision, like a general before battle. She photocopied Michael's letters, redacted just enough to protect herself, and tucked them into her purse alongside her old wedding ring, its weight a reminder of what she'd survived. The morning of the brunch, she stood before her mirror, her gray hair loose, her linen blouse crisp. She didn't need makeup or pearls. She was enough. Linda's house was a monument to excess. Chandeliers, marble floors, the air thick with the scent of lilies and privilege. Guests milled about, their laughter forced, their eyes darting to Ava, who stood by the buffet, her smile brittle. Ethan was there, too, his tie loose, his gaze distant. Susan stepped through the arched doorway, her purse heavy with truth. Heads turned, whispers rippling through the room. Linda's pearls gleamed as she approached, her voice dripping with false warmth. Susan, what a surprise! Susan met her eyes, her own unyielding. I'm here to set things right, she said, her voice carrying, steady as stone. Ava's glass trembled in her hand, and Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with something like fear or recognition. Susan reached into her purse, the letters waiting like a loaded gun. If this fight for justice moves you, subscribe and share. When did you reclaim your truth? She was no longer the woman in the kitchen. She was the storm, and she was here to break the silence. The air in Linda's colonial mansion was thick with the scent of lilies and forced civility, but beneath the clink of champagne flutes and the hum of polite chatter, tension coiled like a spring. Susan stood in the arched doorway, her linen blouse crisp, her gray hair loose, the red folder tucked under her arm like a grenade. The room seemed to pause, heads turning, whispers rippling through the crowd of Ava's extended family and their polished friends. Linda's pearls caught the chandelier's light as she froze mid-sentence, her smile faltering. Ava, by the buffet, gripped her glass so tightly it seemed it might shatter, her eyes wide with dread. Ethan stood near the fireplace, his tie loose, his face a mask of conflict. Susan's old wedding ring pressed against her finger, a silent reminder of the lies she'd survived. She wasn't here to blend in. She was here to break the facade. Linda recovered first, gliding toward Susan with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Susan, we weren't expecting you," she said, her voice loud enough to draw every eye. "This is a family event." Susan's lips curved, not a smile but a challenge. "Family?" she said, her voice clear, carrying over the murmurs. "That's why I'm here, to set the record straight about yours." She stepped forward, the folder heavy in her hands, and the room grew still, the jazz quartet in the corner faltering for a beat. Ava's glass trembled, her breath audible, but Susan's gaze was steady, unyielding. She opened the folder, pulling out Michael's letters, their yellowed edges stark against her fingers. "Ava knew Ethan wasn't my son," she began, her words deliberate, each one a stone dropped into still water. "She knew, and she used it to manipulate me, to bury her gambling debts under my savings." Gasps rippled through the room, followed by a low buzz of shock. Linda's hand flew to her chest, her pearls clattering. "This is outrageous," she sputtered, but Susan didn't pause. She held up the first letter, Michael's handwriting a silent accusation. "She charged thousands to my card, bar crawls, spa days, your precious wedding. All to hide her lies." Ava's voice broke through, shrill and desperate. "She's lying. She's bitter, jealous." But Susan's eyes locked on hers, and Ava faltered, her defiance crumbling under the weight of truth. Susan raised the second letter, her voice rising, steady as thunder. "Ethan was abandoned by his real mother. Michael gave him to me, and I loved him like my own. Ava knew that, too, and she let me pay for her fairy tale while pushing me into the kitchen." The room was silent now, every face turned to Ava, who backed against the buffet, her glass slipping to the floor with a crash. Ethan's voice cut through, raw and unsteady. "Mom, stop." He stepped forward, his eyes wet, his hands clenched. "Please." Susan turned to him, her heart twisting at the sight of the boy who'd once called her mommy after a nightmare, his small hand in hers. But the man before her had stood by while Ava erased her. "You let her, Ethan," she said, her voice softer but no less firm. "You chose silence." Ethan's face crumpled, and for a moment, the room faded, leaving only the two of them. She saw him at 10, his grin wide as she handed him a chocolate cake with sprinkles, her hands still aching from overtime shifts. She saw him at 16, his head on her shoulder after his first heartbreak. But she also saw him at the wedding, smiling under the chandelier, oblivious to her exile. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't know. I didn't see." Susan's eyes burned, but she didn't look away. "You do now," she said. Linda lunged forward, her voice shrill. "Get out, Susan. You're embarrassing yourself." But the crowd was no longer hers. Guests whispered, their eyes darting between Ava's tear-streaked face and Susan's unwavering calm. Ava's father, his booming laugh long gone, stepped toward his daughter, his voice low. "Is this true?" Ava's sob was her only answer, and the room turned on her, the weight of their judgment heavier than any words. Ethan moved toward Susan, his hand reaching out, but she stepped back, the folder still in her grip. "I'm not here for forgiveness," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here for truth." She turned, walking out as the whispers grew louder, Ava's sobs echoing behind her. Ethan followed, calling her name, but Susan didn't stop. The truth was out, and it was enough. Back in Richmond, Susan sat in her lawyer's office 2 days later, the city's brick buildings glowing in the afternoon sun. Karen, her lawyer, slid a stack of papers across the desk, her smile sharp. "The judge approved the fraud claim," she said. "Ava's accounts are frozen, and you'll get full restitution for the wedding, plus damages." Susan nodded, her jaw tight. The money didn't erase the pain, but it was a brick in the wall she was building around her new life. "She'll appeal," Karen warned, but Susan's eyes were distant, fixed on the roses outside the window. "Let her try," she said. Ava had nothing left to wield. Not charm, not lies, not Ethan's loyalty. The victory was Susan's, but it felt hollow, like a trophy won in a game she'd never wanted to play. She thought of Ethan's face at the brunch, his apology too late, his choice to follow her a fragile thread she wasn't ready to pull. That night, Susan sat in her living room, the red folder open on the coffee table. The photos of Ethan were gone from the mantel, boxed gently and stored in the attic, not out of anger but necessity. She couldn't live in a shrine to a love that had demanded her erasure. Her fingers traced Michael's letters. The ink faded but the truth sharp. Ethan wasn't hers, not by blood, not by choice anymore. The realization didn't break her, it freed her. She opened her laptop, drafting a letter to her financial advisor, outlining plans to transfer most of her savings to a local charity for single mothers. The money that had built Ava's fairy tale would now build futures for women like her. Women who'd given everything and been told it wasn't enough. The act felt like shedding a skin, painful but necessary. She stood, walking to the kitchen, where a notepad lay on the counter. She began a list, not of debts or betrayals but of names. Claire, her older friend who'd snuck coffee into her locker. Mr. Henderson, the neighbor who snowblowed her driveway. Dina, the bookstore clerk who always asked about her week. Janet, the nurse who'd stayed late on her own birthday to cover Susan's shift. These were her people, not bound by blood but by choice, by respect. She'd host them soon, a dinner in her home with her food at her table. No folding chairs, no kitchens, no erasure. The thought warmed her, a small flame in a chest that had grown cold. Susan glanced at the roses outside, their petals catching the moonlight. She wasn't the woman who'd sat in the kitchen anymore, swallowing her pain for Ethan's sake. She was the woman who'd walked into a room full of lies and burned them down. She was enough. The doorbell rang, soft but persistent. Through the frosted glass, she saw Ethan's silhouette, his shoulders hunched, his hand raised to knock again. She didn't move. Some doors stayed closed, not out of spite but survival. Susan turned away, her notepad in hand, and began planning her dinner, her life, her truth. The morning sun filtered through Susan's kitchen window, painting the counter in soft gold. She stood barefoot, a mug of black coffee warming her hands, the scent of roasted beans mingling with the faint sweetness of her garden roses outside. The house was quiet, but not empty. Every corner held echoes of a life she was reclaiming. The photos of Ethan, once lining the mantel, were gone, tucked away in a box labeled memories, not obligations. The red folder with Michael's letters sat closed on the coffee table, its truths no longer a wound but a map to her freedom. Susan's old wedding ring, once a heavy reminder of broken promises, was now in a drawer, its weight lifted from her finger. She wasn't the woman who'd sat in the kitchen at Ethan's wedding, swallowing her pain. She was Susan, whole, and that was enough. Her phone buzzed. A single text from Ethan. "Can we talk? I'm outside." She glanced through the frosted glass of the front door, where his silhouette stood, shoulders hunched, hands in his pockets. The sight stirred a memory. Ethan at 8, his laughter bright as they ran through a Richmond park, a homemade kite tugging against the string in his small hands. She'd spent hours gluing that kite together, her fingers sticky with tape, just to see him smile. "You're the best, Mom," he'd said, his voice a melody she'd carried for years. But the man outside wasn't that boy. He was the one who'd let Ava push her into the shadows, who'd apologized too late. Susan didn't open the door. Instead, she sat at her desk, pulled out a sheet of stationery, and began to write. "Ethan, I've given you everything. My time, my love, my life. I raised you not because of blood, but because I chose you. You chose silence when I needed you to speak. I forgive you, but I'm done being your backdrop. Live your life. I'm living mine." Her pen moved steadily, each word a brick in the wall she was building around her heart. She folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and placed it in the mailbox with a note for the postman to deliver. When she returned, Ethan's car was gone, the street empty. The ache in her chest was there, but it was quiet, like a bruise fading under skin. She'd loved him fiercely, but love didn't mean surrender. Not anymore. By noon, Susan was in her financial advisor's office, a small space downtown with brick walls and a view of the James River. The advisor, a kind-eyed woman named Ellen, reviewed the paperwork with a nod. "You're sure about this?" she asked, tapping the documents that would transfer most of Susan's savings to a charity for single mothers. Susan's smile was small but certain. "I'm sure," she said. The money that had funded Ava's wedding, that had chained Susan to a role she no longer wanted, would now lift others. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about rewriting the future. Ellen handed her a pen, and Susan signed, her hand steady. As she left, the river outside sparkled, its current steady, unyielding. She felt that current in her now, a force carrying her forward. Back home, Susan pulled out the yellow notepad from the kitchen counter, its pages already marked with names. Claire, Mr. Henderson, Dina, Janet. Her people, not bound by blood but by moments of kindness. Coffee snuck into her locker, a snow-cleared driveway, a genuine question about her day. She planned the dinner with care, not to impress but to celebrate. She drove to the market, her basket filling with fresh basil, heirloom tomatoes, and a bottle of red wine she'd always wanted to try. At home, she spread a blue tablecloth with sunflower patterns across her dining table, the one where she'd once helped Ethan with math homework, where she'd balanced budgets to afford his dreams. Now it would hold her joy. The evening of the dinner, Susan's house glowed with warmth. String lights crisscrossed the back porch, their soft light dancing across the roses in her garden. The air smelled of garlic, lemon zest, and roasted vegetables, a meal she'd cooked for herself, for her chosen family. Claire arrived first, her nurse scrubs swapped for a linen dress, a bottle of Merlot in hand. "Maggie, you look radiant," she said, pulling Susan into a hug. Susan laughed, the sound light, unburdened. Mr. Henderson followed, his Snowblower stories already sparking chuckles. Dina brought a stack of bookstore bookmarks, her smile shy but warm. Janet, still in her nurse's badge, carried a homemade pie, her eyes crinkling with pride. The table filled with mismatched plates, cloth napkins folded into fans, and a single candle flickering in the center, its flame making the silverware shine. They sat, passing bowls of lemon butter pasta and roasted tomatoes, pouring wine without asking permission. Laughter spilled like water, stories tumbling over each other. Claire's worst shift, Mr. Henderson's feud with a raccoon, Dina's secret crush on a customer, Janet's birthday spent saving a patient. Susan listened, her heart full, her smile real. She wasn't in the background, not tonight. She was the hostess, the heart of this table, seen and wanted. Somewhere between the second helping and the last slice of pie, Claire raised her glass, her eyes bright. "To Susan," she said, her voice steady. for reminding us that it's never too late to sit at the head of your own table. The others nodded, glasses clinking, and Susan raised hers, her voice soft but clear. To the women who gave everything and were told it wasn't enough, may we never sit in the kitchen again. The words hung in the air, a vow sealed by laughter and light. Susan leaned back, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass, the absence of her wedding ring a quiet triumph. She thought of Ethan, of the kite they'd flown, its strings snapping in the wind, soaring free. He was out there, living with his choices, and she wished him well, but he was no longer her anchor. She was her own. The dinner stretched into the night, the porch lights glowing, the roses outside standing tall against the dark. Susan laughed, her chest light, her eyes crinkling without effort. This was family, not assigned, not owed, but chosen, built on respect and love. The next morning, Susan woke to birdsong, the sun spilling across her bedroom floor. She stepped onto her front porch, her robe fluttering in the breeze, a mug of coffee in hand. The roses in her garden were wild, their petals vivid, their thorns unapologetic. She wasn't someone's backdrop anymore, not Ethan's, not Ava's, not Michael's. She was Susan, the main character in a story she was writing herself. The letter she'd sent Ethan was her final word, not out of anger but clarity. She'd loved him fiercely, but she loved herself now, too, and that love demanded freedom. She sat on the porch swing, the wood creaking softly, and looked out at the neighborhood. Kids biking, a neighbor waving, the world moving forward. The ache for Ethan was there, a faint echo, but it no longer defined her. She thought of the charity, the single mothers who'd get a chance because of her choice. She thought of Claire's toast, of Dina's bookmarks, of Janet's pie. She thought of the table she'd set, not for obligation but for joy. Susan sipped her coffee, the bitterness gone, only warmth remaining. She was home, not just in her house, but in herself. And for the first time in years, that was everything.